Morning, folks. We'll be starting up here in about a little over 2 minutes. Might go 3 to let people have time to log in. We'll be starting up in about a minute. Get all my stuff set up and ready to go. So we'll give people in about another 30 seconds, but if you want to download today's handout, just as an outline of what we're doing today, a couple of references you might find useful, and the list of the webinar scheduled for the next year. Okay, 30 more seconds or so. Okay, good morning. My name is David Orr. I'm the director here at the New York State LTAP Center, the Cornell Local Roads program. Just wanted to say hello to everybody, and we'll get started with our webinar today on traffic safety, and hopefully we'll pick something up out of this. We will be taking the polls, as we've been doing, from pollev.com, and since I'm doing it, I'm using my PollEV account, which is David Orr PE, as opposed to the general one that we've got. And by magic, I'm going to hold up my hands and that'll actually get thrown over into the chat pod. So just as a reminder for folks, your audio settings down the lower left, you can check that. The chat may or may not be disabled for you, but if you can, try to use the Q&A. It's a little easier for us to manage things. But you might want to open the chat up, because that's where we'll put messages and, for instance, the download of the handouts and things like that. I may ask you to raise your hands now and then, in addition to the polls. And again, I really do want your Q&A stuff, so please use the Q&A feature. Open that up and put in your questions, try to answer them as we go along here. Okay. Now, this particular webinar is worth 1 professional development hour here in New York State. Because of the way the system works, it's only the person who is registered who gets the credit, and it is counted as a course for those who care. Okay. Now, if you are from out of state, you'll need to check with your LTAP center in your state to see what's going on in terms of the requirements. So let's start with a little welcome. And as a reminder, the polls will be at, you can just search for www.pollev.com/DavidOrrPE, or you can even just go to pollev.com and type it in. Or if you've opened up the chat pod, you can just click on the link that Adam has placed into the pod for me. And before I get any further, I do want to thank Adam and Amanda, who are in the background, making sure everything runs smoothly, and it really does help. So let's start with a couple of polls just to see who you are, where you're from, things like that. So we'll start with who you work for, towns, counties, cities or villages, state or federal, tribal, and the private sector, consultants, contractors, things like that. Okay. And then we'll see if anybody here works for the weekend. Okay. And if you have access problems, you can put your answers in the Q&A, and we'll, I'll add those to our sort of mental numbers that we've got. We do have a person who put in town, for instance, in the Q&A. Okay, so it's a mixture of town and county and village, a few state, and a couple of private folks. Okay, that's good to know. Okay. Then the other one is, what do you do? What is your job? Are you an administrator? Are you a highway superintendent or DPW commissioner? Are you an engineer? Are you none of the above? Field crews is also in the list, but I haven't seen anybody vote for that one yet. And I see I've got a city engineer, Mr. Loopy in there in Auburn. Okay. Okay. It's good to know. Nice blend of folks, mostly highway superintendents and engineers, but we do have some none of the above. If you want to, you can tell us what that title is, but it's not super critical. Okay. And then where are you from around New York State, or even from outside New York State? You can actually click on screen where you're from. So we'll see where people populate this from. So we're getting scattered all around the state. We've got west, we've got east. I have to admit, I didn't look it up last night. Who won the Monday night football game? Maybe somebody can tell me. I don't actually know. But so we have a good variety of folks from all over. That's good to see. Okay, cool. So what we're going to be doing is, this is one of our Y webinars that we're doing. It's a series we're doing. It's going to take us a couple of years to get through all of them, to really sort of go through the fundamentals of everything related to traffic safety. I see the Patriots one. Sorry to see that. Okay. But today is traffic safety. Next week is the MUTCD, which is sort of traffic safety. We'll talk more about that webinar as we talk today. And then after we start up, after the first of the year, we're going to get into some sort of powers and duties kinds of things that could be useful, because we know a lot of folks are starting in office right after the first of the year. Now, a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about today is in our workbook from our workshop, Solution for Safer Roads and Streets, though there are some additional items that have changed since we put that workbook together a couple of years ago. So there's a link in the handout. Please download that and then get information from that. But there may be other things you might want to look at the resources in the handout as well. So what I want to do is I want you to tell me your thoughts on what does traffic safety mean. I want to see what you think traffic safety means, and everybody can see these. So being alert and aware, safety for all road users, including drivers, pedestrians. Vehicles and pedestrians can travel roadways without fear of harm due to poor design or lack of maintenance. Safety for all users. Okay. Okay. Safety for the traveling public. Okay. People traveling at safe speeds. Okay, so yeah, okay, so this is all traffic control. I see somebody put into the Q&A. So, okay. So we all have a thought right now of what we think traffic safety means. What I'm hoping to do is help you understand the why and what we're looking at when we're looking at traffic safety, and some new things that have come along in the last few years dealing with the issue of traffic safety. And of course, what we want to avoid are things like this. This is actually a person going through a red light, hit somebody, and the pedestrian walked away with a broken arm. I want you to know that pedestrian was, yeah, they had a broken arm, but they did walk away. That's not traffic safety. And that's what we want to try to avoid, any kind of crashes that are happening. So why are we here today? Well, part of the reason we're here is we're focusing on fatalities and serious injuries. And in the United States, these are a couple of years old data, but they're not atypical over the last decade or so until COVID hit. We're talking about 30,000 fatalities annually nationwide, okay? And we really don't want to see that kind of number. We really like to see that close to zero if at all possible. So that's why we're here to talk about traffic safety. And in terms of fatal crashes, we tend to focus on certain areas. So the ones we're really concerned about, roadway departures amount to over half of all crashes that involve fatalities. We worry a lot about bicycle pedestrian issues, because while the percentage of fatalities isn't huge, when they occur, they're usually very serious. And of course, intersections are a major issue we deal with a lot, especially in more urban areas. We do get other, some about 12% that are considered none of those three. There are other issues that get involved, but the whole idea is let's start thinking about ways to reduce fatal and serious crashes. This is what we really want to focus on today, okay? Now, I'm going to be using the term crashes. Most of us above a certain age with hair that's more of a grayish color learned accidents. The term we use today is crashes, and a way to remember that is that a crash is just an event. An accident, you assign some blame. So, when the little one has an accident, we know where the blame lies, but even though it's not really their fault, what we're really focused on is the event. We want to look at the event and try to reduce that event, make it less serious, less severe. And so when it comes to crashes, we're going to be concerned about the probability the crash is going to occur, the severity of the crash, and the exposure, which, by the way, is just a fancy term for traffic. Probability, you all know roads in your system where there's a higher probability of a crash occurring. A sharp corner after a long straightaway, a place with really tight and narrow with winding curves that are a little unexpected. These are places with high probability of a crash, okay? So even low traffic, we want to worry about those. It's sort of like the probability that people are actually going to go through the security gate at this particular location. The next thing we worry about is severity, and that's where we really want to focus our efforts and our energies. We don't like fender benders, we don't like minor crashes, but given the choice, we want to avoid high severity events. This is in Nevada, the luckiest man in the world. He actually came around, hit the Jersey barrier, bounced once and turned 180 degrees and landed. You're thinking he had a bad day? No, he pretty much walked away with some minor injuries. If he hadn't bounced the right way, it would have been a fatality, obviously. So we want to focus on the high severity crashes, and we'll talk a little bit more about those in a little bit. And then, of course, exposure, i.e. traffic. Most of us would think the picture on the right is the more severe place, and it is if someone goes off, but the traffic volumes are very different. The one on the right, maybe 30 vehicles in the middle of summer. The one on the left is 7,000 to 8,000 vehicles every single day. So we want to keep that in mind as we're thinking about traffic safety. Now, when I went to school and I learned something called the 3 E's, and then we added 4, I've even seen 5 E's. These are things to help us with traffic safety. And so the first one we always talk about, and we still talk about, we're glad you're here today, and that is education. Education is number 1. There's engineering, things we can do as road managers and operators to improve safety. We certainly don't want to see things like a mailbox made with 4 pieces of angle iron. That's definitely a no-no. We talked about enforcement, okay? And then we learned about the idea of the golden hour or emergency response. That's the E in this particular case. We focused on those 4 items to reduce the crashes, reduce the fatalities, and those are still valid issues. But we're going to come back to the fact we've actually started thinking from a why standpoint, maybe there's a better approach. Maybe there's things we can do to improve and focus on the crashes that are severe and fatal, okay? Now, if you've been to some of our sessions that we've done before, you've seen this chart. There's also a Venn diagram version of this. It has 3 circles that overlap. They're saying the same thing. What they're all saying is that when it comes to crash factors, about 93% of the time, a human has made an error of some type. Okay, it may be a minor one, but it has led to a primary factor in terms of the crash happening. Okay, the vehicle is responsible about 13% of the time. We have bald tires, things like that. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then the highway is responsible in terms of something we could have done better as managers and operators and designers about 1/3 of the time. Now, one of the things I want to break, though, is a myth we have, and I've seen in articles on this, and I'm not sure I even believe the way the articles are written, but that is that, oh, humans are causing over half of the crashes, because by themselves, you can see they're at about 60%, where really the primary factor is the human, 60% of the time. And people go, oh, well, there's nothing we can do about that. Probably can't do about every single crash, but there's actually quite a bit we can do if we start realizing human factors are such a major component. We have to think like the people who are using the roads, whether they're walking or driving or they're in a truck. We think about those human factors. And while they're not the highway related things, the geometry and the signs and things like that, we can think about ways we can deal with that human factors issue. So it's not something we can't fight. There are things we can do, but we're going to have to look at things in a more multifaceted approach to get that done right. Okay. So let's start with looking at the vehicle a little bit. The vehicle is a pretty important characteristic, though it's not a high percentage. When the vehicle goes wrong, it can be very, very serious, especially at high speeds. Now, we don't typically have too many of these kind of problems anymore. You know, the Pinto, remember the Pinto? You hit the end of the Pinto and boom, it could blow up. Or the Corvair, which Ralph Nader called unsafe at any speed. We don't see that kind of problem as much anymore. What we typically see is more of the problem. People are not maintaining the vehicle. The brakes aren't as good as they should be. They're using tires that are just a little bit out of date. Those are still vehicle issues, though there's a human involved in this particular case. But that's an issue. That's why folks like Google and Tesla and all are trying to make cars that overcome some of the human factor issues, but they themselves have to be careful. We've read in the news, we've all seen the issues that have occurred with some of the driverless vehicles that they're not perfect either. And it's going to be hard. I think it's going to be very difficult to get this on all of our road system. I'm personally hoping they will focus on the interstates because I think we can have more control there. But the vehicle is part of the equation. We need to realize that obviously bigger vehicles, trucks and buses take longer to stop. And of course, when they do get involved in a crash, there's more energy involved. So the vehicle is part of the equation we need to think about. We need to think about the human factors. And, you know, we could spend a whole, 2 or 3 hours talking about human factors, even longer. At the Transportation Research Board meetings in Washington every year, they have training sessions just on human factors. They've had them for decades and they're having them again now that we're back in person. And human factors is a major issue. But let's talk about the why a little bit about human factors. What we're really dealing with is our expectations. Are we paying attention? And what are our, we tend to focus on the vision, but we actually don't want to forget about hearing and even feeling, vibration, essentially our senses, okay? In terms of this, perception is reality, however, okay? So keep that in mind. Now, this is a cartoon that somebody put out. A guy does a cartoon called Speed Bump, but this is an actual sign from Europe. And I'm not sure if it's for the driver to warn them that they're pedestrians focusing on their cell phones or to alert the cell phone people to not do that. I don't know. But the idea of human factors is we have to think about the fact that people make decisions. So let's talk about these 3 issues. First one is expectation. So in the Q&A, tell me, what is the most critical sign in this particular intersection? What's the most critical sign in this intersection, in the Q&A? Yeah, somebody caught it. Yes, there's a hospital sign there, okay? And prior to the last version of the MUTCD, which we'll talk about more next week, that yellow H on a black background was considered acceptable. It was in the standard here in New York State. It has been changed. All hospital signs now have to be white lettering on a blue background because that's our expectation. That's what we all expect to see. And we don't want to break people's expectations. That's a huge issue with human factors. People get into habits, whether they're good or bad, they get into habits. Okay? There's another one. Our brain fills things in. We're actually pretty good at it. It turns out that we probably all saw the word on there that said school, right? Everybody saw school. If you saw school, probably like me, didn't get great grades for spelling because it actually was shakul, okay? Somehow somebody had put the lettering in wrong, but your brain sees school. We're pretty good at that. Don't break people's expectation and you'll actually do pretty darn well. And then, are people paying attention? Well, let's just see here. I'm going to do an awareness test. Some of you have probably seen this because I've done this before, but I want you to count the number of passes the team in white makes. Count the number of passes the team in white makes. Okay. Okay, so did everybody get 13? I hope so. How many of you saw the moonwalking bear? Raise your hand. Be honest. Did you actually see the moonwalking bear? Raise your hand. Not too many people are raising their hand. I've got a couple, but do you see it now? If you ever see this video again, you will never miss the moonwalking bear. But the problem is, it's really easy for us to miss things we're not expecting. Now, this is a PSA put out in the United Kingdom, actually in London, and it was for cyclists. It turns out, as humans, we don't see cyclists and motorcyclists as well as we see cars. Our brain expects to see cars with two headlights. And so we miss bicyclists, we miss motorcyclists, which means people who ride those have to be a little more careful, maybe make themselves look more like a car. Because again, that's that human expectation to some extent, but also attention. Are they paying attention? Okay. And then of course there's vision. I'm going to go over here and lower the hands. Tell me if you think the picture is moving. Raise your hand if the picture is moving. Okay, I got 11, 12, 10 people. Okay. It is not moving, actually. It's a static picture. But our brain, our vision, for a lot of people, it moves. A way to see if it's moving or not, take one of the corners and look at the circle in the corners, and you'll see they're not moving at all. Okay? It's just an optical illusion. And there's actually quite a few of those out there. But our senses can fool us. So we have to think about that. What do people expect? What is their attention on? And what are the senses telling them? So think about that when we're looking at roadways. Now, of course, when we're looking at roadways, the highway is a major factor. We saw that it was more than a third of fatal crashes where it's a serious issue. What that generally has meant in the past is a focus on geometry and traffic control. We'll talk a lot more about traffic control in next week's MUTCD session. We'll mention it a little bit here today. But when it comes to the working at the roads, we tend to focus on geometric standards, such as the AASHTO Green Book, the New York State Highway Design Manual, which those two are really related to each other strongly. AASHTO has a low volume set of standards. It was put out first in 2001 and updated in 2019. And some people have developed their own geometric standards. We have some on our website. You are welcome to download any of these things. There's a cost for the ones from AASHTO, but the key is those are geometric standards that have been developed to look at a combination of both traffic safety and mobility. And that's a balancing act that we have to deal with, that we don't always get perfect. And what we do to do this, make it work, is we develop functional systems. We look at principal arterials and minor arterials as the main roads. We tend to put a little more effort in the geometry of those, the width of those. We want them to be free flowing. We have collectors to bring the traffic in, and then we have the local roads. And a subset of local roads is the very low volume, less than 400 vehicles per day roads. And the idea behind all of this is we change the geometric standards based upon the traffic volume, the importance of the roadway to improve that mobility, but also that exposure issue we talked about in terms of crashes to help improve everything a little bit. Now, in terms of functional classification, the reason we tend to put a lot of the effort on the arterials, even though their percentage of length is pretty small. I mean, the principal arterials, the national highway system, 5 to 10% of the mileage in most states, but the traffic volume is usually 50% or more. Okay, versus the local system, which is, 65 to 80% of the roads. Here in New York State, it's about 80%. The volumes, however, are relatively minor. But think about it, all of your trips start on a low local road, pretty much. But we typically, because the speeds can be lower, we might be able to do a little bit less in terms of geometry. And the two places we tend to focus on geometry, we focus a lot on intersections. As we talked earlier, that's a major factor in a lot of crashes. So we focus on making intersections safe. And we focus on horizontal and vertical alignment. And these are things we have to deal with that work pretty well, but they don't solve all of the problems. Now, one of the things that comes out of all these standards is a criterion for safe stopping distance. And the idea is you got the driver's eye at 3.5 feet above the pavement. We usually use cars as our sort of starting point. While a truck takes longer to stop, it's higher up, usually can see a little further. But we can't account for trucks if we need to. And we don't want to hit an object that would actually create a serious crash. So we typically use 2 feet above pavement, which is either a really big object that's laying in the road or the back end of another vehicle. We don't want to have two vehicles hitting each other. And this is the stopping sight distance that you'll see in a lot of the standards. It drives a lot of how sharp corners are, how much we're going over a rise do we deal with. So these are all factors that we have to deal with. This is what we've done for long time, and it does improve traffic safety. But if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always gotten. It's a phrase that Linda would like to say, our old director. And it does remind us that we still have 30,000 people per year who are dying on the roads across the United States. And there's sadly pretty good evidence that that number may jump as much as 40,000 people this year. The first half of this year was about 20,000 people estimated to have died. People have gotten out of good habits and practices for driving. They're going a little bit faster. And so we're having a lot more crashes than we really like to see. So this isn't good. So we really want to try to focus on how do we change our habits as we come out of COVID, as we get back to driving, to reduce all of the crashes to get that number closer to zero. Now I want to show you where we started from. The idea that came out is an idea called nominal versus substantive safety. And the idea is, rather than just focusing on the code says, lanes need to be 12 feet. Well, going from an 11-foot lane to a 12-foot lane doesn't take the risk from really high to really low, like the blue line says. That's nominal safety. Oh, I met the standard. The reality is every increase makes things a little bit better. So let's focus on where we can make increases, substantive increases. Because the reality is, why does an 11-foot lane considered unsafe and a 12-foot safe? No, that's not the way the real world works. And this, along with something called vision zero, towards zero deaths, other words have been used over the years, has led to an approach that the Federal Highway System Agency, can't wake up this morning, Federal Highway Administration, FHWA, is calling the safe systems approach. Now they have this graphic. We'll talk a little bit more about this graphic. We only have 1 hour together, so we're not going to get into a lot of detail. But one of the things to think about is everything is done together, okay? We really have to try to focus on the fact we don't want one mistake to lead to a serious injury or a fatality. So let's focus on one of the more critical issues, and that's speed, okay? Now, these are results of studies that have been done for years. At 23 miles an hour, if a pedestrian gets hit, okay, there is about a 10% chance they will get killed. Now, this is cars versus adults. The numbers change with children a little bit, but let's just look at the general population. 10% killed, about 22%, just under a quarter, who are going to get injured pretty seriously. So even at 23, we want to try to avoid that. But if we jump the speed to 42 miles an hour, okay, and a lot of places around the state have speed limits in the 40 to 45 mile an hour range. Now we're talking half the pedestrians are killed. About 3/4 of the remainder wind up being seriously injured. So really, we're talking only a small percentage that walks away with minor injuries or no injury. And of course, if we get up to above 55, which is our state speed limit, we're talking about 90% of the pedestrians don't walk away, and pretty much all the rest are seriously injured. So we want to think about how do we reduce the crash speeds. Now, there's similar numbers that you can look at when you have two vehicles hitting each other. Even inside the vehicle, speed makes a difference. How do we reduce that? Well, the idea is look at everything holistically, look at everything together. So we want to focus on the users. We want to focus on the vehicles. We want to focus on good speeds, okay? And we want to focus on safe roads where we can, and of course, post-crash care. Now, how does this all tie in to the old 4 E's? Well, we still need to do education. We still need to get people to help make themselves safe, okay? So that first E of education is still there. We still have to look at engineering safe roads, okay? That's part of the equation. We have to look at enforcement, but we also have to look at good speed management. Just lowering the speed when people don't actually do it may actually increase the number of crashes. So we need to set the speeds properly so that there is both enforcement, but also self-enforcement where possible, okay? We definitely want post-crash care. That golden hour is absolutely true. We want to really focus on getting people to good medical care within that first hour. The faster, the better chances of coming out of everything okay. And then in terms of safe vehicles, really, we're already working on that some, but we could do more. We can make vehicles safer if they do get involved in a crash. And of course, over the years, that has happened. You know, seatbelts, airbags. I've got automatic cruise control, which is really nice, helps stop me in a pinch. So all these things together can improve things. And the idea behind this is redundancy. So that, yeah, the vehicle user might not do something perfectly safe, and maybe the vehicle has some issues, and maybe they're going a little too fast, but if the road's safe, there won't be a crash. And the idea is it's sort of the Swiss cheese model, that all of the things together can improve the crash factors, okay? So that's something we need to keep in mind as we're thinking about improving road safety. And you all can probably think of situations where you've been involved in a crash, you've seen it, or hopefully didn't participate in it, but that does happen, where you start realizing, wow, if just one thing had changed, if that tree hadn't been in the right location, if the person hadn't been looking down at their phone, there would not have been a crash, or it would have been a minor fender bender, okay? So that's the idea behind the safe systems approach, and you're going to see a lot more about that. But when you're thinking about the why of traffic safety, keep that in the back of your mind. Got to look at everything together. It's not just do some education and then separately do engineering and separately do enforcement. They really all have to come together for this all to work. Okay, so back to our picture we saw of crash factors, we can really focus then in on the fact that yes, the humans are part of the equation, but are there things we can do to help them with their attention span, with their expectations, and with their senses, okay? So we know human factors are a major issue. I'm going to ask you now to open up the poll EV and tell me, what can road managers do about human factors? What can you do about human factors? See what you think. You can try to limit their impact, okay? So think about, on your road network, are there places where you could make it where there's less chance of a human making a mistake? And a good example, improving lighting, providing more space for recovery. Yeah. Controlling pedestrians. Yeah, that can be very effective in some places. Somebody put into the Q&A decreasing the speed limit. But remember, I just mentioned the fact that good speed limits make a huge difference. We don't want to just lower the speed limit if people are actually doing a different speed. They drive based upon what they know, not based upon necessarily the signage. But it can be very helpful to have the right speed limit. Crosswalks, properly marked, things that help keep people awake and engaged, like rumble strips, yep. Good signage. Signage is huge. That's why we're doing a whole webinar on that next week. Training and awareness. Yeah, education campaigns can be very effective, but you got to hit people the right way with the right message at the right time. Limiting signage. Ooh, that's a good one. We'll talk about that next week too. That too many signs can actually make things worse because they don't have the time to respond. Separating the pedestrians, roundabouts. Roundabouts are actually a very effective tool because they tend to reduce the types of crashes that are severe. You have fender benders, and side swipes are not as dangerous, okay? I see somebody put a note about chat, but I do see your Q&A, so put in Q&A. Chat may not be working for you. Yes, put it in the Q&A. We'll copy that to everybody. Speed humps are part of a traffic calming program. Speed bumps may actually make things worse. So we can talk about that in a class on traffic calming. I think we actually have a webinar coming up. It might be next year's cycle, I can't remember. But yeah, there are things we can do. There are lots of different things that we can do to improve traffic safety and think about those human factors. So when you're looking at your road network, don't just go, well, the humans are drunk or they're on their phone or they're just going too fast. Are there things we can do to help deal with those human factors? And I think the answer is yes, but that we have to think about the why and how people actually drive, okay? So what I want to do is I want to spend most of the, this last half hour giving you a few ideas. And as I give you those few ideas, let's tie that back to those thoughts about safe systems and human factors to try to reduce crashes, especially the fatals and the serious injuries, okay? Now, the first one is going to go back to our safe stopping sight distance. We've used this for literally decades, okay? The idea of the 3.5 feet above the pavement, height of the object. The height of the object used to be smaller. We've made it a little bit bigger now, it's 2 feet. But the idea is we want to be able to stop the vehicle before we have the crash. That's good. But we know, especially in urban areas, places with lots and lots of distractions, people take longer to decide things. That's just the nature of the beast, okay? So we have to keep that in mind as we're going through and looking at things. So that's something you may want to think about. If you're on your cell phone and you're sitting there with your cell phone and you're texting, you need a lot more time to react than if you're paying attention. If there's a sign warning you of an issue or you've got to pay attention, you drive, you can stop faster. And so in the latest version of the Green Book, the AASHTO design standards, they've added in something called the decision sight distance. Okay, the decision sight distance is a pretty good idea, something to think about. Even in a rural area, it increases it a little bit. Add a little bit more time for people to actually make their decision. A good way to do this, by the way, the next time you're riding, please do not do this when you're driving, though I know some of you probably will. Next time you're riding in a vehicle, and you're especially in an urban area where there's lots of things going on, especially maybe you're looking for an intersection or something, just count the number of times you realize you're focused on the sign over here, or the pedestrian over there, or what's going on with that construction site there. Ooh, that's a nice looking truck. So the idea is you add more time, you move your signs back a little further. Maybe you spread things out a little bit differently to give people the decision sight distance. And it's a pretty good idea. How much? It's in the standard, but the why is what I want you to think about, okay? We need to think a little bit about the visual value of really all of our traffic control. And we're going to be talking about that next week even more. But lines is one that very, very quickly can show you how much it can improve human factors. Now, this is a nice long straightaway. There's not really any major safety concerns as long as people stay on the roadway. But just imagine it's a snowy day, you don't know the roadway, and maybe it's not perfectly straight. Well, the addition of even a center line can make a huge difference in terms of seeing it. Even a line that's a little bit worn makes a big difference. And of course, if you add an edge line, it gets even better. And we know that wider edge lines actually help quite a bit. The idea is, think about your traffic control, not just as a way to just tell people, oh, you've got to do this, but more helping them with those human factors, okay? Helps them paying attention. That's where it could be a rumble strip, for instance, that you put on here. The rumble strip might be part of the line combination to help people keep into the lane that they need to stay into. So again, we'll spend a whole hour on traffic control next week, but I want you to understand and look at your traffic control plan. I do know once you put lines down, you got to keep maintaining them, but very valuable to have good traffic control. Now, we want people to stay on the roadway, and we have whole classes and workshops on keeping people on the roadway. But when they do leave the roadway, we really want a clear zone. Now, we're not going to get a 30-foot clear zone like you might want to have on the interstate system. That's something that comes from some research, which I'm not sure we should really focus on. What we really need to focus on is a consistent clear zone. Now, the clear zone is the location, and let me get my pen working here, make sure it's working here. And let's see what color is going to work. Yeah, I think the yellow one will work. Okay. The clear zone is the location. Oh. Try this again. Get my pen working. There it is. The clear zone is the width from the edge of the pavement to the first fixed object. In this case, there's actually a small tree. And if you're wondering how big a tree needs to be for it to be considered a fixed object, 4 inches or so, something that would stop a vehicle. You know, think about a Honda Civic, well, an old Honda Civic, maybe a Fit. You know, if it hit that tree, it would probably stop pretty quick. So we want consistency to have a good clear zone. And that clear zone is pretty important. On a low volume road, 2, 4, 10 feet could be useful. On an interstate, they are trying to get more distance, but it's not just the clear zone that we need to look at. Okay, now we'll see. It said it wasn't loaded, but hopefully this works. Let's see here. My image didn't get loaded, and I don't know why. The image did not load. Let's try this again. That's very odd, because it's going to have you mark the edge of a clear zone, and yet it's not showing. I wonder if anybody can see it on their own thing. I'm going to check something real fast here, because I can. What do people see if they have it on? Survey says, interestingly enough, it shows up on the app version, but it didn't show up on the screen. I do not know why. That's really weird. That's very strange. Well, welcome to technology. Well, the idea is, do me a favor, go look at your clear zones. Okay, absolutely important to do that. And because I can, I'm going to just do something here. I'm going to temporarily drag over here so you can all see it. The picture we were going to look at. It won't be perfect, but it'll get you in the ballpark. Okay. Okay, do you see that? That's the thing I wanted you to mark. What do you notice in what really ought to be a really nice wide clear zone? Does everybody see the utility pole? I hope so. Okay. That utility pole makes that clear zone, rather than being really nice and wide, much less safe. In fact, it's at the bottom of the ditch. And when vehicles go off the road, especially if people fall asleep or they lose control and they tend to run down the ditch line. My first boss out of college, when I was over at Yates County, the superintendent, when he was in the construction industry, he fell asleep one night. Probably pushed his foot on the gas as he fell asleep, and he went through a utility pole at 65 miles an hour. The right side of the car got sheared off. He walked away. 2 feet over, he's not walking from anything. So go start looking at your clear zones. Try to get consistency in your clear zones. Okay. So do me a favor on this one. This one should work here. You're driving down the roadway, you blow a tire. Do you want to go to the left or do you want to go to the right? Okay. In the Q&A, going to go to the left or you're going to go to the right? Let's see what people think. Go left or going to go right? You're going to go left. Okay. Left, 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 left looks better. Your instant going to go left. Jeff, who took the picture, says neither. Yeah, he's probably right, but I want you to notice, Jeff Scott took this picture too. Notice what you see in the grass. Those are stumps. Anything above about 4 inches can snag your vehicle and you're going to have a really, really bad day. In this case, those are deadly fixed objects. So again, look at your clear zones. If you're cutting down trees, we're going to talk a lot more about trees here in just a minute. Make sure you got them flush. Okay, you don't have to remove them. You can grind them flush, but get them down 4 inches maximum. Less is better. Okay, so check your clear zones. Make your signs breakaway. You know, we're not going to talk about this as much next week as we're talking about the signs themselves, but we put up things in the right of way that are fixed objects. And if we don't put the right breakaway hardware, it could be a bad day. That's just a small pipe. Okay. It used to be very commonly used. We really want to be using things that can be hit and break away. Now that's something like you'd see in the interstate. Okay, and yes, those are old cars because they've had this technology for a while, but you should make sure all of your signs are breakaway. This is just a simple bolt system with the old U channel that you've all used. And look at it, it flies away. Now in an urban area, we may not want to use something like that, but in a rural area, yeah, that's probably all you need to have. And it is literally an extra 25 cents for the bolt, and then just a few extra dollars a post, which actually is a little easier to install. So think about things like that. Think about the humans. And again, you don't want one mistake to lead to a fatality or a serious crash. There's something you need to think about with your whole system called systemic safety. Okay? This is the idea that we don't know where the next crash is going to occur, but we can still think about the factors that lead to particular kinds of severe crashes. So I'm going to show you a picture, and I can't get Polly V to be happy unless you put a dot down. So I'm just going to show it to you, and I want you to think about this for a minute. This is all the fatal crashes that occurred in the southern tier. Okay, Binghamton is in the center of the picture between 2012 and 2014. So a 3-year span. Okay, and those are the dots. I'm going to move back and forth a couple of times so you can see all the dots. Okay, where do you think you should put your efforts? Where do you think you should put your money if you're trying to focus on the fatal crashes? In the Q&A, where would you put your money? Any ideas? It's not easy, is it? In fact, it turns out there's not really a cluster there. Some people like to say, well, there's a few up near Ithaca, and then there's a couple that are just north of Binghamton. The problem is if you focus and get closer in, you realize that none of these crashes are literally anywhere near each other. They're half a mile apart at best. We have done a pretty good job of getting rid of most of the clusters. Okay, we still have a few, but most of the time, these are random events. They occur all over the place, okay? The idea is focus on the common factors, things that you have overrepresented. You got too many of them, and where they're located, and then focus systemically around your whole road network. So this is data for roadway departures, which we saw earlier is about half of all fatal crashes. Okay, so let's focus on just roadway departures because it's a very common, the most common rural crash, in fact. Note that about 26% of the people who pass away when they have a crash is because they overturned the vehicle, and in a lot of cases, like it or not, they weren't wearing their seatbelt, but that's about a quarter of it. So we don't want steep slopes. Okay, that's good. We have about 26% of the time where the vehicle goes into the other lane, the opposing crashes. Those are very serious. We know that. That's where airbags help, rumble strips and things like that. But fixed objects is going to be even a higher percentage, 41%. And then we have some other things that can happen in there too. So let's get rid of the one that's a minor one, and let's focus on those big three, the fixed objects, the overturning, and the opposing, okay? Now, some people like to do the overturns, slopes, and I don't disagree with that. But what I want to focus on, okay, is the fixed objects, because again, that's about 41%. And within that 41%, look at this. Trees make up about 20% of all of the fatal crashes, but almost half, 45%, if you want the number, of fixed object fatalities, okay? So if you want to focus on improving safety, think about reducing the crashes involved with trees, okay? Now let's get the video here. Okay. There we go. This is 30 miles an hour when a vehicle hits a simulated tree. This is 43 miles an hour when a vehicle hits the simulated tree. And then watch what happens at 55 miles an hour. Okay. The tree is into the driver. Okay. So think about that. What can we do about tree safety? Okay. What could you do about tree safety? In the Q&A, you can tell me what your thoughts are. What can I do about tree safety? You could remove the trees. Yeah, absolutely. That would be the best thing. But here's a good idea. Remove the trees on the bins. We're not going to pave the forest. I don't want to remove all the trees. Trees have some real value for lots of things just beyond all other stuff. But yeah, figure out what your clear zone is, what you want, make it consistent, remove well outside that, make sure you don't have something where people might drive if they do go off the road, and try to remove them. Okay, don't let them be planted in the clear zone. Yeah, don't let them put shrubs and fences and things that are in the clear zone. Okay, you may need to think about rail. Yeah, at some point you may need to think about putting up rail, but balance all of this stuff with human factors, cost, and maintenance efforts. Okay, and try to keep them trimmed. A consistent clear zone makes a huge difference. When we look at tree crashes, okay, when we look at that, and we start realizing what's going on, we can actually start to see that there's some common factors, okay? Now, most people would think most tree fatal crashes occur in rural areas. It turns out about 2/3 do occur in rural areas, yes, but actually 1/3 occur in urban areas. So this is an urban area problem as much as it is a rural one. Most of the time it's passenger cars. About 2/3 of the tree fatal crashes are passenger cars. But of course, that also means that about 1/3 of the time it's other vehicles, trucks, buses, things like that. Okay. The posted speed turns out is not much of a factor. About half the time it's people going over 55, or 50 is the official technical one that the feds used. So about half the time over 50 and half the time under 50. Speed matters, but it turns out trees are so deadly that we really don't want to try to make sure people don't hit them. And notice, tree fatals are half the time on curves. Curves do not make up half of our road mileage. Most of our roads have mostly straightaways with a few curves. So focus your effort. Again, this is the idea of systemic safety. Focus your efforts where you're having problems. Outside of curves, places where people might be unexpected to go off. And you can do that for all of the factors of safety that you've got in your system. So again, think about why people are having a crash and focus on that approach, and you'll be better off. One that we don't do enough of, look at your edges, especially on your corners, but then when you're paving, think about putting in a safety edge so that until you can back that shoulder up, it's not a drop off. These are some of the most dangerous crashes. And again, that deals back to that idea of looking at everything. We improve this so that if the human does drive off, and we've all done it, they don't try to pull themselves back on and create a much more serious fatal situation. It shouldn't be fatal or serious injury just because they drove off the road once by a few inches. So maybe you want to widen the inside of the corners, especially if you got a lot of trucks, you know that they tend to cut the corner. Cars do it too. Why not either pave that or widen that out? It actually is in the standard, but we don't do it as much as we probably should. Okay. I could make a longer list. Okay. But in 1 hour, what I really wanted you to think about is think about traffic safety from the standpoint of why do we do things? Okay. Think about those human factors. So I want to end with our PDH questions, but also I want to revisit traffic safety one last time. Okay, so let's do our PDH questions. What is the name of the new FHWA approach to improving traffic safety? Let's see what you think. Okay. I mentioned the 4 E's. I mentioned Vision Zero, but it's the safe systems approach. Nice job. Okay, the 4 E's is what most of us learned, and they're still valuable. Don't apologize if you're using the 4 E's. It's still useful. But the thing to think about is that we really want to not just look at them as little separate bins, which we sort of got in the habit of doing, but look at everything together. Setting the proper speed limit to deal with the human factors, educating people on why we're putting in a roundabout, thinking about ways to reduce the severity of the crashes. It's a safe system, and one mistake doesn't lead to a fatality or a crash, okay? We can do nothing about the 90% of crashes due mostly to human factors. True, false, but only in the highway geometry is all we can work on, or we need a multifaceted approach. Yeah, absolutely. If we're going to get towards vision zero, okay, we can't think we can't do nothing. We can do some things. We need to have a multifaceted approach, though, not just the geometry. So we need to involve the emergency management people, the police people, the elected people, the community, get everybody involved. We're not going to improve traffic safety by just changing the geometry. That's not going to be enough. We're going to have to do more than that, because you can have the best geometry in the world, but if somebody is not driving well, there's not much you can always do about that. So you got to focus on everything, okay? The most deadly fixed object in terms of the number of fatalities. Yeah, I think that's a pretty easy one. I don't see anybody having a problem with that one. Trees, okay? I'm not saying that guide rail, utility poles, and embankments aren't dangerous. They are, okay? But just keep in mind that let's focus where the most dangerous things are. Put our trees where they belong. Think about utility poles. Don't let them be put where they don't belong, okay? You have some control over that. And hopefully we can improve traffic safety. So now, in your mind, we saw these before. What does traffic safety mean? Okay, have you changed your thoughts at all a little bit? Safety to all road users, yeah. Vehicles and pedestrians can travel roadways without fear of harm. That's important. But safety for all users. Oh, we're seeing some of the ones we saw before. Let me just see something. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to clear the responses and let y'all put new ones in. So I'm going to put in newer ones. People traveling at safe speeds. Yeah. Traveling public and workers. Yeah, we can talk about work. Comfort. You'd be amazed. That's actually a pretty good idea. If people feel comfortable driving, they actually tend to be a little bit safer. Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Okay. But I want you to think about traffic safety, what you can do, and you can do more than you think. Okay. It's not just geometry and signs. There's actually a lot more going on. And designing for no injuries, we'd love to do that, but we probably need to focus on the fatalities and the serious injuries, okay? We actually do that when we put up a stop sign, for instance. Yeah, when you put up a stop sign, like it or not, you're probably gonna have more crashes, but hopefully they're fender benders if you do them properly, okay? Okay, with that, we got about 3 or 4 minutes. Any other questions that you've got, you can put them in the Q&A and I'll certainly hang around and answer them for you until the top of the hour. But with that, hopefully you enjoyed it. Next week, our webinar is on the MUTCD itself. Okay, and then we're going to be taking a break over the holidays and we'll be starting back up on the 4th with some discussion of some legal issues. Again, the whys, departmental duties on the 11th and worker safety on the 25th. And again, I'll look and stay until the top of the hour, answering any questions that you do. Hopefully you got something out of this, and hopefully you have yourself a great and safe holiday. And if I don't see any questions, we could even cut it off a couple of minutes early there, Adam and Amanda. And thank you again for all the help in the background.